resources, inspiring interviews, business practices, and practical advice to take your art career to the next level. Join Sergio Gomez in today's Artist Next Level and get ready to take control of your career.
Hello, my Next Level friends. Sergio Gomez here, and I want to welcome you to another episode of the Artist Next Level podcast. If you love the stories that you hear in our podcast, I would love to invite you to take some time, just take a minute, visit iTunes, and write a review about our episodes, about this podcast. It is one way in which you can help us to continue bringing these amazing stories to more artists like yourself. So please share the love, go to iTunes, and write an awesome review. In this episode, you're going to hear the story of an artist and a writer team working together to end child sexual abuse. Their collaboration brings awareness to a social issue many people are afraid to talk about, and it also provides victims an opportunity to start the healing process. Their art project called Child Fracture invites us all to take action and stand up for those who are more vulnerable in our society. That's our children. So let me tell you a little bit about my guest. First one is Vandever. Alan is a multimedia contemporary artist based out in Chicago. He's a father, husband, a son, and a good friend as well. Family and friends are very important to him. He has lived his life with the goal of making every year worthy of a good movie or a great book. He loves to take risks, embrace adventure, and lives life to the fullest. And as a result, he has many wonderful stories, some of which you are about to hear in today's podcast. My second guest is Derek Hopkins. Derek was born and raised in Chicago. He's a student at Columbia College in Chicago and a student at large at Northwestern University. Most importantly, he's a writer of short stories, personal essays, and poetry. He's also working on his first novel about the contemporary American ghetto. And I'm very excited to introduce to you my podcast conversation with Alan Vandever and Derek Hopkins. Hello, Alan. How you doing today, man?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, it's great to have you here, and I want to welcome you to the Art Next Level podcast. We're going to have a great conversation. I'm really excited to chat with you and also with Derek, which we will introduce him in a minute too, and about this project that you guys have been working on for a while, and I think it's leading to a specific point in time in which you guys are very excited about what's happening with the project too. But before we talk about that, I just want to kind of talk a little bit with you, Alan, because you are a multifaceted artist. You are an artist who I know here in Chicago for a long time. I was trying to think, how did we met? I don't even remember. We kind of run into each other's events or also in shows and openings. So it's one of those things that you've always been there, and that's pretty awesome. And actually, when I remember kind of the early days when you were working on the wearable art, and I have one of your awesome jackets that you painted, which is pretty cool. So it's fun to have that also on something I can wear with pride. So, Alan, tell us a little bit about yourself. I don't know if you grew up from here in Chicago, or how did you become an artist? Kind of just in a few words.
So I grew up in 13 different cities, so I moved around a lot, Chicago being one of those cities. I was born in Mitchell, South Dakota, and my grandmother is a painter, so before I can have memories, she had me painting. My dad is a wood carver, woodworker. He used to build things like furniture, but now he just does sculptures. So I grew up around making things, fine art and craft and usable things. My mother was very much into education, and she traveled a lot. So we went to art museums. Everywhere we'd go to the art museum. So, we'd go to New York, we'd go to the art museum, so art was just part of my life. In fact, my very first memory was laying in my crib, and my mom had put a print of Van Gogh's Sunflowers by my crib.
Really?
And I would just spend hours staring at that print. So it's like burnt into my brain. So I think that is because of that, what my mom putting that picture there, that I became an artist.
That is pretty cool. And how did you end up here in Chicago?
So the year I graduated from high school, my mom and stepdad moved to Chicago, and then they never moved again. So
Okay.
yeah, the minute I moved out of the house, they stopped moving around, and so it became my home base. I didn't go to school here. I went to school I got a full ride scholarship for football at Northern State University, and then I did a little bit of graduate school at U of I. My ex-wife was in law school at the time, and law school was too much for her, so I took time off from school to help her, and then I never went back. Yeah. And then I came to Chicago. But then I still love to travel, so I'm usually here for like 4 years, and then I travel, and then in fact, getting ready for a 4 to 6 month travel for next year. So I get excited about that.
Very cool. How do you describe your art practice? Because you've done painting, you've done experimental art, you've done performance, you've done wearable. Like if you find somebody on the street and says, hey, I'm an artist. So first question, so what kind of art you do? How would you answer that?
I describe myself as a Chicago-based contemporary multimedia artist. It's just my quick pitch. But yeah,
it's right on.
Was my passion. Yeah, I went to school undergrad for sculpture, for 3D art, and about halfway through, I decided I liked two-dimensional art better, so I switched to painting. I ended up actually getting a degree in painting and three-dimensional art. So I got 2 degrees in art. In fact, I guess I switched. I think I switched my senior year. Yeah, I switched my senior year to my emphasis. And partially because I just wanted to stay in school too, because I loved school. And then, yeah, and then I had a couple really good mentors that helped me. And I worked as an intern. So I interned for some really great artists when I was a young artist. And that's why part of what I do too, my practice is having interns and helping them, just like, because I learned so much from the people I interned from. So I try to give even more to my interns than I got. So,
what you got. That is awesome. And how did you get into the wearable art, which is also pretty awesome?
That was
something
was
you're really active with. Good
accident. The first year I showed it down during the Basel Art Fair in Miami was 2009, and I left. I won the 2009. I won the artisanship award, one of the artisanship awards through. And I had an awards ceremony, and I had to wear a jacket. But I left, so I went and I got my jackets dry cleaned and my suit, and I left it at my kitchen table. So I got there, and I didn't have anything to wear. And as you know, doing Basel is expensive. So I pretty much emptied out my bank account, getting there and doing all the costs that are involved in showing at Basel for that week there. So I didn't have money to go buy a nice suit, so I went to a thrift store, and when I got back to the hotel room, it's like, wow, this is a thrift store jacket. I can't wear this. My award ceremony. So I painted the jacket, and I sold it that night. It was like everyone loved it. By the end of the night, I sold it to someone. I got about $600 for the first one. It was only I only had it for like 3 hours before it sold, 4 hours maybe.
Wow.
It was a little wet when I wore it there. So I remember being in the cab. I was being really careful not to lean back because I didn't want to get paid on the cab seat. So that's how I got started. And then just the fact that I sold it
that is cool.
That night, it really motivated me. And that's the jacket that you have came from that first beginning series. And then my stepdad works for a law firm here in Chicago, and one of his partners approached me about working with him on wearable, so interactive with NFC technology clothing. So I worked with him for about a year, and then that got me into like, how do you make clothes? How do you design a pattern? How do you do all that sort of stuff? And then I met a woman named Marina, who's a Russian designer, and she really took me under her wing and taught me so much. It's amazing everything that I learned from her. And so now I feel like I can basically create any type of clothing that I want. In fact, the only thing I don't know how to create are shoes, and I just signed up for a class to learn how to make shoes, so I can make my whole outfit.
That's awesome. That is pretty cool. And that's
I when I do the clothing, I think of them as artwork. I don't think of them as fashion. I'm trying to make a work of art. The material, if I paint on it, I think of it as the canvas. The wearer, the stretcher, I guess. They become the artwork.
Yeah.
And
it's wearable art, in that way. Yeah.
Part of it too is
that's wonderful.
There was a time where I had. Well, I guess I still have a bunch of collectors who collect my work. But after 3 or 4 paintings, that's pretty much, I feel like, the limit of what they're going to buy. But maybe every few years, as a progression, they want to have a piece to show your progression as an artist. But the clothing was a way to sell something more to them. And also, with collectors, one of the problems is your prices of your paintings kind of get locked in because you don't want to devalue your art. So I needed to come up with something that cost less than $5,000 to be able to sell. So the jackets and the even the toys I was making, the collage toys pieces. I don't know if you ever saw those. In the beginning, that was for that purpose, but now those have gotten to be expensive. So now I have a hard time selling them. So I always have to come up with a new product to be able to have something to sell to the general public, because I want everyone to have my art. And so I don't want to have all this very expensive art that no one can buy. It doesn't make any sense.
Right. And that's something that I really love about you, as an artist too, that, they have that entrepreneurial spirit. And like you say, trying to come up with new ideas. It's not only the thing that you do for, the art that you do for the wall or for the collector, but giving people accessibility to what you do as an artist and your way of working and finding all these different ways. That is remarkable. That's something that I always love about you, Alan, because I think you're always thinking of what's the next thing that I could do, and that is pretty awesome. And that kind of in your career you have done, as you said, you're a multifaceted artist. You have done all kinds of things. You have also done performance for a while. You were also doing this kind of performance event, Rescue and Destroy. And you had also audience participation. There you go. So it's, you have all this, which now has kind of led to this big project that we are really dying to hear about. That's called A Child Fractured, which is by you, and also in collaboration with Derek Hopkins, which I would love if you can help us introduce Derek here. He's also here joining us in the call. But tell us a little bit about Derek, and then I'll ask Derek also a few questions too.
I'll do a little background on the Childhood Fracture Project. When I was in college, I was in therapy for sexual abuse that happened to me as a child. And I did paintings to help me put the pieces together. And the paintings turned out really amazing. And I ended up showing them at a number of universities. And I had written short poems with them. And actually, I got some media coverage from that. But I wasn't quite ready for that much attention. And I also didn't want to, one of the newspapers wrote an article, and they called me the child abuse artist, which I thought was just kind of a weird thing. So I was like, I need to wait a while before I tackle this project. And then one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to have a really great audience. I wanted to have a platform to speak from. So talking about Rescue Destroy, that was one of the reasons I was doing Rescue Destroy, because it was controversial and people talked about it and it got attention. And I used that to build an audience and a platform to speak from, so that people could hear when I found the right person to partner up with Childhood Fractured, I would be able to tell my story and have people hear it. So first came Derek. We were working on the clothing line together. And I just loved his writing. One day I asked him if he would be interested in working on this project I had in mind, where I wanted to do 13 paintings and have stories written about them. And then, actually, I think that's a good place to let Derek come in, and he can tell where, how that affected where it went from there. So.
Yeah. Hi, Derek. How are you?
I'm good. How about yourself?
I'm good, doing good, and I'm really happy to have you here in the program too. Thanks for checking in with us and be part of the conversation. We're super excited to hear from you as well.
Absolutely. I'll pick up from where Alan left off. So,
awesome.
When I met Alan, I was halfway done with my first novel about the contemporary American ghetto. And
okay.
I was helping, brainstorm and do some writing for like a business plan and other things related to the clothing line that Alan was speaking on. Mm-hmm. And one day Alan pulled me aside. He's like, hey, man, he's like, you're interested in, doing some writing for some paintings I want to do. I was like, yeah, sure. That sounds simple enough. Sounds cool. Collaborate. I like your art. So the next day we had a meeting, and then he was like, all right, so I want to do 13 paintings about my childhood sexual abuse. And I stopped in my tracks. I was like, whoa, because I was also sexually abused as a child. So I was like, and I've only told up to that point, I only told 2 other people. And, being a man and, trying to be cool all the time, I was like, I'm not really going to be talking about that much of my life. So he just was very upfront and, open about it. And I was just like, man, that happened to me too, man. And I didn't go into the details at that time. And I was just like, yes, that happened to me as well. And you know what? I love to do it. And here we are now, a year and some months later.
Wow, that's amazing. It's amazing, how these two stories connect. So tell us a little bit, Derek, tell us a little bit about the process of, after that first meeting and agreeing to making something special out of this. And, what was the process of, where do you start?
Absolutely.
When you have
we started,
that idea?
Me and Alan, we started off just, Alan was giving me a little bit of his background, of his life. I was trying to get a better understanding of who he was. So our original premise was he was going to do 13 paintings, and I was going to write a first-person narrative from his perspective as a child to give the reader or the audience and comes from being sexually abused as a child. And, we were going back and forth. We were talking about, like, what art means to us, what this topic means to us, what it means as men, what it means as artists, all these things. And we were really focused on intent, like our creative intent. Like we wanted to tell the story, but as we got deeper into the sessions, so the way that Alan told me his story was I would go into there's 13 painting sessions. I went into every one blind, meaning I didn't know what he was about to paint or the story attached to it. And I would then he would paint and tell his story, and I would gather that information and start writing about it or start writing the narrative for it. And like the third session in, Alan and I were talking because we just have like, a decompression after each session. We just talked about what happened. And Alan was like, this has got to be something more. And, we kept bouncing ideas back and forth, and we're like, the reason we're doing this is to raise awareness on childhood sexual abuse and prevent it, like that's a very specific function. Is we want people to, telling your stories. That's something people have done, forever, but with a purpose. Like, so you realize what somebody's been through, so you can, talk about this to somebody else, spread the word, something along those lines.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And so, Alan, going back to you for a minute, were these sessions where you created each of these paintings were also kind of a performance base in that you had an audience? Is that correct? How you the way that you went with this, or how did it work?
Yeah, the first 13 paintings I did in my studio, and I would have about 3 or 4 people over every time we did it. So there was always a small audience. And then I was awarded a grant from Awakening Foundation to do a project with them about sexual abuse. So Derek and I went there and met with them, and they agreed to give us both a grant, one for him to do the writing and one for me to do the painting. And then we decided what we were going to do is we were going to recreate what I did in my studio, but in front of an audience.
Okay.
So that was where the bigger performance piece came in. So what I would do is I did the exact same thing I do in my studio. As people would start showing up, I would start building the stretcher, stretching the canvas, prime the canvas. So the first half hour of the show was just me building a canvas and stretching it and priming it. And then while the paint was drying a little bit for the primer, I would introduce Derek and I and talk about the project and what we were doing. And then I would start painting the painting. And as I painted, I would narrate the story. So I would tell what had happened to me. And I did this from the beginning to the end over a 1.5 year period of time. The experiences that I went through and how they got me, or how they started abusing me, and then how it grew to more abuse by more people that were connected with them. And these were my neighbors. It wasn't family at that point. It was all people that lived across the street from me. Started out with babysitting. And then talking about how that affected me growing up. And we did this in 6 different live sessions. Some of them were extremely emotional. The first painting was about not being able to talk about it as a child, that they had scared me so much. They had done so much brainwashing, scare tactics, torture, those horrible things to make it so I wouldn't talk. And the school and my parents knew something was wrong with me. So they sent me to specialists, and they even went and did a sleep study on my brain to see if I had some brain damage or something. During that time, they questioned me about abuse, and I would not say it. So my first painting was about that, and I lost my voice. I couldn't speak for a whole week. And then the next painting was about the first time that the father of the neighbors raped me. And it was about the pain that I felt. And for a week, I was in pain. It was like I got hit by a car. So doing these paintings was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before with doing art. Because it was this total emotional reliving an experience and putting it out there for the world. It was very cathartic.
And I assume then even though same painting, but just a completely different way of working, because now you had an audience and you are opening up yourself, you are sharing your thoughts, your memories with a live audience who's on the other side of the table or the room, listening to your story, and in that moment they become also part of the story and feel the pain. I would love to hear if you have some stories on how the public has reacted, how they receive what they have experienced throughout any of these events. Either you or Alan or Derek, whoever wants to answer.
Derek, I'll let you take this one because you always started the discussion period.
Sure. So, with respect to Alan and myself, in every session, multiple people, complete strangers, would come up to me or him and just tell us their story or acknowledge the fact that it happened to them. And that is, for some people, that the fact that they were abused as a child, or that they were sexually abused as a child, or that they were tortured, that is some of the most intimate and personal information that I think people have. And to see the way that they were inspired to come forth and, give that information up was it in the moment you're dumbfounded. You're just like, wow, like I'm doing something good. And that's just like the overwhelming feeling. And in my personal life, since I started working on this project with Alan, I've had family members, step family, friends, people that I hardly knew reach out to me either like through phone or social media or however, and just tell me like, hey, they may or may not tell me what happened to them, but they're just like, man, it's amazing work. Like, it's very inspirational. Like, thank you very much for doing this. Like, this is something necessary. And when we kept getting deeper and deeper into the work and, like looking at studies of it and trying to figure out how many people does this happen to? And there's some statistics that say it happens to 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 6 boys. There's some statistics that say it happens to 1 in 10 people. Another study I read that was conducted over 13 English-speaking countries that said the prevalence rate of sexual abuse before the age of 18 is 63%. So even if we were to take half of that and say it's 30, so 30% of the population on this planet was sexually abused, and it's so underrepresented. Like, I don't know about you, but I rarely ever hear anybody talk about it, and I find that interesting, to say the least.
That's one of the things that Derek and I have really become passionate about, I think, is just needing to bring up this dialogue, being able to, get people talking about it, to talk to organizations about it, to do speaking engagements, to do live painting. One of the reasons we're doing this podcast right now is that on the 20th we have our first book coming out about this. So it's super exciting. We'll be able to reach a larger audience. We've videotaped every event and live streamed them. I think on one of the nights we were live streaming, we had 160 plus people watching the live stream.
Oh, wow.
Pretty amazing. And we always have a discussion afterwards, and it's the discussion part of the event is, for me, the best part. It's just amazing how, it's, well, obviously everyone knows what they're coming to, so they're already, interested in the topic, but it's great to hear what the audience has to say afterwards, and they've always just said some amazing things.
Yeah, do you feel that because you are vulnerable with your story and opening up to your story, that in that way it invites others who may have experienced the same thing to open up themselves to, and maybe for the first time in their life, I assume, for many of them, start to experience healing and feeling that it's okay to share that story.
One interesting related side note is a good friend of mine. He's a therapist. His name's Dr. Silverman, Manny. I call him Manny. And, I approached him when I started working on this project because he's been a clinical psychologist and a professor for like 30-something years, and he knows a lot about a lot of things. And he came to one of his shows. I'm not going to say the person's name, but he took him there on a therapy assignment. And the guy, in front of everybody, a complete room of strangers, just opens up about what happened to him. And he's like, and how liberating and finally the monkey's off his back and he can move on with his life. And it was just amazing to see that happen.
Wow. Well, that's so inspirational, guys, what you both are doing. And can you share for our friends who are listening right now, also, for those who are here in Chicago, tell us about this October 20th event that you mentioned, Alan. What is the event about? What are the times, the place? Pretty much invite the audience to how they can participate on this.
For sure. Yeah, this is the conclusion of the live performances. So all the live performances have been performed now. The paintings from all those performances will be on display, so it's a gallery opening. Also, our book that is goes along with goes along with those paintings will be available. That'll be our book release event also. It's at, I think it's called the North Center on Ravenswood.
4001 North Ravenswood.
There we go. And it's 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock, October 20th, Friday night. The previous events, there were tickets involved, but there's no tickets. It's free to attend. And we'd love to have you guys there. This one, we won't be getting into any of the deep emotional stuff. I know a few people, just said that they weren't quite ready for that. or weren't sure if they could handle it, which I totally understand. But this will be, this will just be a fun event, a regular art opening. Yeah.
It feels like the October 20 event, it becomes more of a celebratory event where you release the book is the part of the journey that had led to that point of, going through this whole process and saying, we made it this far. Here's the book. Here's more of the stories, and I think bring attention to that. What's the name of the book, Derek?
It's Childhood Fractured: A Live Narrative, which is the name of the series we did at Awakenings Foundation.
Awesome. And for our friends who are not here in Chicago, can the book be found online somewhere?
Yeah, it's going to be available on Amazon. So you just go on Amazon and just type in Childhood Fractured: A Live Narrative, and then it'll be right there.
We'll also have it on our blog and our webpage, too.
Alan, would you mind sharing your website where kind of friends can find you?
Yes. Childhoodfractured.com is the Childhood Fractured website. And also there'll be a link on mine, alanvandever.com.
That's fantastic. Well, Alan and Derek, we are getting kind of close to the end of the podcast, and your stories, what you have done with the story is really remarkable. It's inspirational, not only for me, but I think for all of our listeners as well, to take that step and not only find healing for oneself, but, help others to find that. And I really hope that this podcast episode can also help our friends. And there might be other artists out there, who have experienced some traumatic event too, that, again, in some way or fashion, art, becomes a catalyst for healing, which is, I think, Alan, what you are doing with this too. And, you always have that way of finding how art can be part of your life, not only in the good moments, but also in the bad moments too, and how art can help us, find a way out. And that's what I love about what you both of you are doing. I really commend you on that. Now, what's ahead for the future? So October event happens, and it's a great event. So then what's happened next?
So the first project that Derek and I first started on was the 13 paintings. So we're still working on that. That's a much bigger project. So we'll be finishing up the second book. We'll also be doing more speaking engagements. But we're planning for when the second book is done to do a 3 to 4 month book tour, speaking tour, where we travel all over the country, talking and having art shows about pop-up shows in different cities, bringing the artwork, working with organizations that have like-minded missions. One thing that I don't think we've mentioned is Childhood Fractured will soon be a non-for-profit. Our goal is to end childhood sexual abuse through contemporary art. That's our mission. So this is, I've committed the rest of my life to working on this project. I'll still be doing my art, but my regular or my other art. But this is always going to be the major focus for me from here on out. So
that's fantastic. How about for you, Derek? What's coming up next?
Absolutely. Well, I wrote this book while writing the original book, so I guess you could say I wrote a book while I'm writing a book.
That's right.
Yeah. So once this second book's finished, I want to find the time to finish the novel that I was halfway done with when I met Alan. But yeah, I have a 4-year-old little brother, and he just turned 4. I'm sitting at his birthday party, and I'm just like, and he has some family kids over. I'm just like, this can't happen anymore. Yeah. This just can't happen. And not only can it not happen, one of the things me and Alan have talked about is so people come to the event or people get made aware of our project, and they're like, wow, this happened to me, X, Y, and Z. And that's great. That's honestly great. But what else are you going to do? It's like pushing people right. You acknowledge this now. For me, I viewed what happened to me as an opportunity to make sure it doesn't happen to any other kids. That's the most healthy way for me to look at it. So we're going to keep putting that out there. Is it happened to you, and you're going to you'll heal in your own way in your own time. And while you're healing, you can make sure that it doesn't happen to anybody any kids in your life or any kids that you may come into contact with.
Right.
Yeah, that's one of our big goals is to, nowadays you become a victim and then you become a survivor. And then that's kind of like the end of your journey. And as far as like writing about it or talking about it, we want to create a third level where you become an activist, a warrior, and you work towards helping end childhood sexual abuse. It has to be a grassroots program because there's not money behind it. There's not people. It's something people don't want to talk about. If there's, 30-40% of the people in the country have been victims, that means there's a lot of abusers out there, and they don't want people talking about it. So it's a very complicated thing to deal with, or subject matter to talk about. And we want to look at all the other movements that have happened in our society and create a grassroots movement of survivors that want to make it so that there's no more victims.
Right, make a difference. And I think because also sometimes there may not be the know-how, how do I help, and by you, both of you, being at the forefront of this movement and creating this organization that now will be a non-for-profit organization. So again, it becomes a way in which people can find a place where they can, in a logical way, make a difference. It's the know-how, right?
Absolutely.
A lot of times there's like, I want to help, but I just don't know how, so I never do it. So, when you guys provide that roadmap and that value, they can say, hey, join us. We're already doing something. You can be part of this. You can make a difference. I think it will get really good traction. So, guys, Alan and Derek, I just want to, again, thank you for spending, half hour here with us at the Our Next Level podcast. It was really fascinating story. Really fascinating project that both of you have. I want to really thank you on behalf of the art community, particularly here in Chicago, for what you do for the art community, for your involvement, and for really making a difference and taking a stand on a problem that's kind of going under the table for so many years, and you bringing it out to the public. And we hope that we can all be part in some way. Supporting what you guys do and, helping to stop this as well at all levels in society. So as we close, guys, any last words that you would like to say before we say goodbye?
Yeah, Childhood Fractured Live Narrative will be available on Amazon October 20th. And we're having our event at Awakenings Foundation, 4000 North Ravenswood, October 20th, 6 to 9 p.m.
Awesome. That sounds fantastic. How about you, Alan?
If you don't want your children or your friends' children to be sexually abused, become active and join us in doing something about it.
Absolutely. Thank you for that call to action, Alan. Again, thank you, Alan, Derek, for being here. I want to thank all our friends who listen to this podcast. Please share it with your friends. This is one way in which you can help to share their story, to share this awesome initiative that's having, it's grassroots here in Chicago, but it can go and change the world as well. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you at the next level.
Check out our website at www.theartistnextlevel.com, where you will find our podcast library, learn about our upcoming webinars, find resources relevant to your career, and much more. Thanks for listening to today's podcast, and we'll see you at the next level.